So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. I am really pleased to be here, and thanks to Coco for inviting. So when I got invited, I was thinking, what can I possibly say to a group interested in publishing? Now, my background, as you can see, is research networks, so more scholarly communications, as I was saying to Chris just now, than publishing, but we have some interests. And I also thought, maybe it would be a good idea to sort of give you some insights into what we're doing as research networks and how we see this scholarly communication and publishing space. So most of what I will talk about is the background. So I'm not so sure the room is familiar with research networks as a construct, national research networks. But these are typically organizations that are non-profit. They connect campuses together in a country. That is within that network is the national research network, and then you have a regional research network that actually connects those national research networks in one region, and then they are interconnected across world regions. So the organization I work for, the Western Central Research Network, is one of those. It's a regional network that connects the countries in Western Central Africa. Now, there are 3 regional networks in Western Central Africa. So I'm in green, Western Central. There's another network called the UbuNet Alliance in South and East Africa called, and the third one in North Africa called Arab States Research Education Network. That's what RENs stands for. And those countries that are listed, so the countries that actually have functional NRENs in them. Yeah. So I just pass through that. So basically, this is one of the project slides. So it's comes them and put it together. The beneficiaries are usually universities, hospitals, research institutions. In some countries, they connect in schools as well. But generally, universities and teaching hospitals in most of the countries. So for services, connectivity is the primary service up to this point, but then we're also sort of providing above the net services for these users. Now these organizations differ in structure from country to country. In some countries, they are sort of funded by government, not very much in Africa though, 1 or 2. But in most cases, it's a mixed funding, it's hybrid. Some community provides some funding, there's some government support, and some cases the development partners sort of chip in. So yeah, pretty much said all of that already. So the networks in Africa are connected through Europe to the global network. So Europe has been the principal partner. Proximity is probably a big argument for that. They added values within all kinds of things. Now, African networks are slightly different because the situation and context is different. So you find African research networks typically straddling a lot of areas, including connectivity, capacity building, and interfacing with policy and decision makers. So I thought I'd give you, for some that don't know, this is not just African, it is global. There are all kinds of global research networks. In the US, it's called Internet 2. I sort of spoke to a few internet old-timers who will be very familiar with the emergence of that network in the US, but similarly across all the other world regions. So there are about 130 NRENs generally, and about 113 of them connected. In Africa, we have about 38 of them, and 22 countries currently connected. So I think this is a very familiar slide, but these are the kind of numbers, the challenges that we have, these networks are trying to sort of deal with. So the one that we are, when it comes to publishing, the one that speaks to us most loudly is the 2% of the world's research that, the claim that we produce. We know it's much more, so there's a problem with accounting, or they don't know where it is. Maybe that's a problem because it's not discoverable. So then another issue is the human capacity. So in terms of researchers per people, we have the numbers are actually very low. I'm not even so sure that's up to 326 because the data is not very good. But yeah, and then of course, connectivity continues to be a problem. It is a whole lot better. It's much better than it was 10 years ago. So we have sea cables almost, encircling Africa now, but there's still a challenge taking all that bandwidth from the seashores inland. So more terrestrial fiber required. Some countries have quite a bit. South Africa is pretty good. Nigeria is a little bit good too. There is a challenge with the ownership of the cables. So we need for them to become a little bit more open access and shared. I mean the infrastructure, not the, and that should improve things. But that's all work in progress. Yeah, so AfricaConnect, the project I'm actually talking about, this is a project where the 3 regional RENs have come together, and for the last 10 years, we've been building this network. So you can see the image in 2010, there was hardly any connections in Africa. All the connections were going from Africa to Europe. But in the last 10 years, we built a few more links. So right now, most of the regional RENs, WACREN actually was the last to emerge, but most of the RENs now have connections between themselves and onwards to Europe. Oh, sorry, I got to get it wrong. Yeah. So this is the project. This is the 3rd iteration of the project. So the projects generally last 3-4 years. The first iteration was mostly build the links in South and East Africa. Second iteration was some links in North Africa and West Africa. And the 3rd iteration, we thought, and then the telecoms landscape in Africa is also very dynamic and it's growing very rapidly. So by the 3rd iteration, we thought, okay, well, we still need to build some more infrastructure in terms of connectivity, but we wanted to sort of invert the priorities and start to look at the publishing infrastructures, more cloud and data centers. So the projects have always been a partnership between African partners and the European Commission. So fortunately, they have an Africa project that allows us to fund 20% of the cost of these projects. So in this case, in AfricaConnect 3, it's just under 40 million euros, and we provide about 20% of that. And most of that goes into connectivity. That's the biggest thing. So, but now we want to spend a little bit more money on the other things, and this project ends in 2023. So we're actually starting to ideate for the next iteration of the project, which is also why I'm here, because we want to spend a little bit more time and effort on the infrastructures that actually drive the scholarly communication. So in this, I've probably just sort of told you what that is, but the output we're most interested in here is 3 and 4, right? And we want to be able to we have capacity issues. So we don't have enough journal editors, we don't have enough reviewers, we don't have enough. So that's one focus. And the other focus is to be able to leverage technology, avoiding legacies that don't concern us, because sometimes I hear the conversations in external fora, and I see that some of the challenges you have are not our challenges. So we don't have legacy to worry about. We can actually leverage some of the nice, interesting technologies you talk about from the get-go, and that's what we want to do. So those 2 outputs, we really focused on them, and we've been building foundational infrastructure to support this, because it doesn't really exist. Sometimes it's hard for you to sort of conceive that there isn't sufficient authentication infrastructure to make things just easy enough for universities to connect to something. Just because if I don't know who this person is, then some of the models that seem so straightforward to you just fall on their faces. So we've built some of that around. We've done that in 2 forms. So we sort of support the countries to actually build identity federations, but so that we don't have to wait for them. We've also sort of invested in something called EduID.Africa, which is an identity framework, and a catch-all that allows people to participate in projects that we drive, even if their countries are not ready to sort of with the infrastructure. So we've done that. So mostly trust and identity, and then cybersecurity. As soon as the pipes got bigger, we started to have everybody interested in what we had in our network. So that's become a focus for us as well. But this is really what we're talking about. So LIBSENSE is so at the beginning, we were building these networks. Then we realized that, okay, we had networks, we had data centers, but we hadn't connected with the users. Now, in the course of that and exploring the options, we identified librarians as the stakeholder group that we needed to connect with to drive this agenda. So that's what we did. So we started to promote these communities of practice with NRENs and librarians, because the NRENs were generally techies like yourselves. They would sit together, they would talk to themselves, and just move on. And then they would look back and there would be nobody behind them. So LIBSENSE became a flagship initiative, and it was building this community of practice. And we've approached that from 3 levels. So one is we're talking to governments, university leadership, on the policy side. The side that concerns us is infrastructure, really, mostly, and we're building out infrastructure as well. So we have this notion of shared platforms. We think it really doesn't make sense not to share, especially when there's a dearth of capacity. So what we're doing is having the REN communities and the library consortia come together and sort of identify what their needs are and trying to solve them. So we're doing all kinds of things. On the campuses, we see the library as some kind of, the open science commons on campus. So we're trying to sort of strengthen the information management capabilities of the librarians. We're looking at connecting leadership on campus with the libraries so they can sort of formulate strategies a little bit better. On the national side, like I said, we're doing the platforms. We have this policy action we call National Open Science Roadmaps. So essentially, we go into a country, we bring in all the stakeholders involved in the space. They're usually driven by the science ministry or whoever is the owner of the science and technology sort of policy. And the idea is to infuse as much open into those policies, because we just see open as the only viable way to move at least scholarly communication forward. And we did some other things as well. And fortunately, UNESCO, I don't know how familiar you are with the UNESCO Open Science recommendations, so they've created a framework that allows us to sort of connect a little bit more with governments who have signed up to it, some of them signing up to what they don't really understand, but it allows us to at least walk into the door and say, hey, you signed that, so let's talk about it. So LIBSENSE has become quite popular, and it's become the avenue, or at least the lens with which we look at scholarly communication and publishing as a whole. So I got a few more minutes left, and I would like to talk about this, but I just wanted to sort of, because when I was coming to the US, I was thinking to myself, if I was to connect with some people who had shared interests and had technology that they wanted to sort of work with, and had interest in Africa and want technology to work with, then it would be a successful trip if I connected and had something to go back with. So I don't want to spend too much time on detail, but I thought it would be important to understand how we view this infrastructure. And so the overarching principles, some of those I put on the slide. So the first is those principles of open scholarly infrastructure, all the notions of open source, community governance, and ownership resonate very strongly with us. Another one is the core community framework for best practices in repositories. One that's as part of our infrastructure strategy. There are 2 parts as far as we see them. One's repositories, and the other base publishing platforms. So repositories were very big on repositories because it allows the campuses to sort of own their own infrastructure. And then CORE, excellent organization, has community-driven international network of repositories, and they published a framework for best practices, so just another guidebook that we use when we sort of formulating our own strategy. And then those that we actually sort of wrote ourselves. So when the UNESCO Open Science Partnership was having its global consultation, we kind of submitted a statement to it to say essentially that from our view, open science, this is how we perceived open science. We still believe it has to be local, and some of the issues around data, for instance, generally have legal issues that are best resolved within national boundaries. So all of that was basically what we wanted to address. Then, of course, I'm sure you're well aware of the inequality, the need for equity and diversity. And we wanted to also own our infrastructure. So yes, there's been discussion about the cloud, but the cloud lives somewhere, and we want our cloud to live in Africa. But one thing that we also needed was for all this infrastructure to be decentralized. We understand the issues with centralization as well. And there's also, as much as it could be better, there's also infrastructure that exists, different stakeholders with different models. And we think that the NRENs, as much as we will drive the infrastructure that takes the long tail, resolves the issue with the long tail, and have a lot of people who don't have the resources and have to have a platform to use, we don't want it to be centralized. We want overall a system that's decentralized and is totally interoperable, as much as we can make it. So what we did then was don't forget, the AfricaConnect 3 project started in 2019. So around that time, we had been talking with a number of partners, Adam and IFUL. IFUL is an organization that works in Africa, been working in Africa for probably about 15 or so years. They have half of the infrastructure that we're talking about, they have somehow been involved in bringing it to bear, the capacity building for librarians over the years. And so there's installing institutional repositories. We came together with Coco initially, and the conversation was around, can we find a way to organically identify what needs our needs and what this infrastructure we wanted to build should look like. Again, we didn't want to sort of take everybody's issues lock, stock, and barrel. We wanted this infrastructure to be shaped to our context and our needs. So we worked with Coco, had a series of meetings. Unfortunately, this started just before the pandemic. So those physical meetings had to be remote, but we had on some online meetings and workflow sprints with a group of editors and researchers and toolmakers from across Africa. 4 of them. We're writing that up at the moment, so we'll publish that. But that was supposed to be the beginning of a coalition of open access, of organizations interested in driving this agenda in Africa. So COVID is over now. This is part of that revival, and that question mark there is for. I'm looking for the who amongst the crowd I'll be putting on my next slide. So this is, I got 1 minute, so I'm doing quite well. So this is the slide that actually concerns us now. How are we thinking about this whole space, and what are we going to be doing in the next months? We have started. So we want to disrupt, but we also know that, because we don't really have very much to worry about, we have we have less of a reputation to be concerned about. So there's really no reason why we shouldn't just start at the edge and drive these new models. But this is not sort of, clear cut yet, not even for the leaders in this. So what we are doing is that mixed system. Now this image has come out of a workshop that was held recently in the Netherlands, where they were looking at the scenarios that were possible in this preprint open review, publish, review, curate submodel. So we think it will be mixed for us. We'll be supporting the existing journals that need strengthening, but we'll be putting our energies in preprint servers and repositories and trying to drive open review communities. And using that, whatever capacity we build in the open review communities in both systems, for the journals. But we don't know how this is going to evolve. So one of the things, we have some tools that we're using to sort of clear our heads and sort of drive a direction. So one of them is Kotahi, because Kotahi supports divergent workflow pathways. We want to minimize the amount of infrastructure we use. We just want it to be interoperable. We want to build capacity quickly, so the fewer tools we use, the better. We're also very interested in the Notify protocol from CORE. So that's really new. It's just been funded by Acadia a few months ago. But what it does, it uses linked data notifications, or intends to use linked data notifications to support communications between network systems. So the rough idea at the moment is that, if we enable the existing infrastructure with Notify, and we're using Kotahi for similar infrastructure for review communities, and then we can start to have this environment that is a little bit interoperable and independent of, and everybody can own their own bit of infrastructure. So I thought this book space was an entirely new space for us. But we had this whole ideation meeting in Brussels about a few weeks ago, talking about the new project. One of the things we're looking at here are textbooks, e-textbooks, and that's a challenge in the system. So we are interested in getting faculty together around courses that are popular within the country and across countries to create a few textbooks. So of course we're going to need a platform, we're going to need business models that work, some way to, yes, I see that, some way to sort of monetize that word, monetize. Thank you.